is the microphone. And right here.
Yeah, but I thought that was for his presentation.
This is for the string.
Okay, so do I need to hold it, or is it
No,
good
that's
there?
fine. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, no, go.
Okay.
So I can just do this? Do I need to speak into it, or
Yeah, we'll need to turn it on right here.
test?
Right there. Welcome to the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers monthly meeting. The presentation will begin shortly.
I am Scott.
I am Sherry.
We are the Shoshones.
I am Anna.
I am Marianne.
I am Stacy.
Patrick.
Anne.
Serena.
Burn. Chris. Mason.
Sarah.
Kalia. Tasia.
Skip.
Naeem. Carter.
Caleb.
Olivia. Chris. Micah.
Shanshanshu.
Kelton.
Jennifer.
Carter.
Tom.
Wendell.
Grizz.
Chris. Patty.
I am a bartender.
I am a university professor.
Doctor of Veterinary Medicine.
I am a medical technologist.
I'm an Army veteran.
Doctor.
Writer.
A retired school teacher.
Graphic designer.
Lawyer. Saleswoman.
Self-employed. Project manager.
Life insurance.
Lifeguard. Stay-at-home mom and a college student.
Archaeologist and writer. Contractor.
Crazy aunt.
A professor.
Museum curator.
Program specialist.
Retired medical educator.
A buyer.
Pilot. Web designer.
Troubadour.
Volunteer coordinator. Homeschool student. Social worker.
I'm an American.
I am a dog person.
Vegetarian. Breast cancer survivor.
Husband and parent.
A mother.
We are a family.
A mom.
I am a woman.
Single and straight. Husband and a father.
Straight and a mother.
A high school senior. Middle Eastern and an animal lover.
Straight, single, pet owner. Gay.
I am a thespian.
I am an immigrant.
I'm a history geek.
I'm African American.
I'm a lesbian, transgender, polyamorous, vegetarian, American immigrant.
Immigrant.
Grandparent. Brazilian immigrant.
Citizen of the world.
Gender fluid.
I make videos.
Wife, mother, and great-grandmother.
I like to ride my bike.
Astronomy.
Bicycling.
I like to read.
I like to watch movies.
I like to sew.
Play the ukulele.
Gardening. Reading.
Live music. Cycling and riding.
Reading and watching movies.
Creating art. Hanging out with my family.
Cooking. Comic books.
I am a theater nerd, and Netflix is bae.
Camping and hiking.
Photography and art.
Teaching and helping others.
Kicking it with my middle boys.
Hiking.
Hang gliding. To draw. Science.
Creating art.
Drummer.
Writing and theater.
I like to help my fellow man.
I like to do science public outreach.
I like to help animals.
I volunteer with the LGBTQ community.
I like to help people.
Advocate for equal rights.
Recycle.
Support women's rights.
Read to children.
Human or humanitarian or whatever.
Demonstrate fitness outside. Organize fundraisers.
Care about people.
Volunteer at women's shelters.
Work at the bird sanctuary.
Take care of animals.
I like volunteering with Little Rock's homeless.
I am an ally.
I like to help people.
Taking care of animals.
Volunteer for community service.
I like to help others in need.
Help recovering alcoholic. Help a non-profit.
Volunteer medical services.
Showing people they are worthy of love.
Rescue animals.
Volunteer in my community.
I am a former fundamentalist Christian.
I am a naturalist.
I am a former Christian.
I don't believe in God.
We are atheists.
Adamant atheist.
I'm a humanist.
I am a lifelong non-believer.
Agnostic.
I am a free thinker. Atheist and humanist.
Former Christian, current atheist.
Atheist.
Free thinker and humanist.
Free thinker.
Former evangelical Christian.
Preacher's daughter.
I believe in God.
Lifelong free thinker.
Spiritual free thinker.
I'm an atheist and a free thinker.
Atheist.
Secular human. Atheist and former Jehovah's Witness.
I am a dudist.
I am humanist and was raised Southern Baptist.
I am an atheist.
I am a way-fallen Catholic.
I am secular.
I am secular.
I am secular.
We are secular.
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 Secular. Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
Secular.
If only a few things make us different, are we all pretty much the same?
We are members of the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers. And really, if only a few things make us different, aren't we all pretty much the same? Come join the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers on Facebook or on meetup.com. Welcome to the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers monthly meeting. The program begins now. Welcome to the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers monthly meeting. The presentation will begin shortly.
I am Scott.
I am Sherry.
We are the Shoshones.
I am Anna.
I am Marianne.
I am Stacy.
Patrick.
Anne. Serena.
Burn.
Chris.
Mason.
Sarah.
Kalia.
Tasia.
Skip.
Naeem.
Carter.
Caleb.
Olivia.
Chris.
Micah.
Shan-Shan-Shu.
Kelton.
Jennifer.
Carter.
Tom.
Wendell.
Grizz.
Chris. Patty.
I am a bartender.
I am a university professor.
Doctor of Veterinary Medicine.
I am a medical technologist.
I'm an Army veteran.
Doctor.
Writer.
A retired school teacher.
Graphic designer.
Lawyer. Saleswoman.
Self-employed. Project manager.
Life insurance. Lifeguard.
Stay-at-home mom and a college student.
Archaeologist and writer.
Contractor.
Crazy aunt.
I'm really counting on them not recording right now. No, I was thinking about originally coming out and opening and greeting with, "Hi, Sarah." She hates rainbow. Yes. Well, it's equal. It's the equal sign. But do you see? It's a rainbow. So I am making a statement. Yes. Well, did I tell you? I told you about my shirt. You know Betty Furneaux. You know Betty Furneaux, right? Who she is. Okay. She made me, and I'm putting it on a clipboard, but she's going to do a design that I can put on a t-shirt. We'll talk about it later. If I could have everyone's attention, please. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Arkansas Society of Freethinkers Big Meeting. ASF is a nonprofit organization devoting to maintaining the separation between religion and state, advocating a scientific and humanistic viewpoint, and improving the lives of non-believers. You can learn more about ASF by picking up one of the flyers available at the back table or on the web at arkansasfreethinkers.org, or the most reliable way, by getting to know one of the people here and the organizers around you. Now for our standard disclaimer. ASF is a diverse organization with members who represent a wide range of opinions. The speakers who we present at our big meetings do not necessarily present the views of ASF or its individual members. Because we are a 501c3 organization, ASF cannot directly support candidates for public office, but we can advocate for causes such as separation of church and state, scientific literacy, societal progress, and truthful communication. That being said, next we have Sherry Andrews, who will present our free thought of the day. Let's give a warm welcome to Sherry.
Thank you. Pull this up on my phone. Okay, our, what is this? Our free thought of the day?
Yes.
It's kind of like the brief and spectacular moment that you see on PBS. So the free thought of the day is by Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut wrote, "When I was 15, I spent a month working on an archaeological dig. I was talking to one of the archaeologists one day during our lunch break, and he asked those kinds of getting to know you questions you ask young people. Do you play sports? What's your favorite subject? And I told him, I don't play sports. I do theater, I sing in the choir, I play the violin and the piano. I used to take art classes. And he went, wow, that's amazing. And I said, oh no, I'm not any good at any of them. And he said something then that I will never forget, which absolutely blew my mind because no one had ever said anything like it to me before. He said, I don't think that being good at things is the point of doing them. I think you've got all these wonderful experiences and different skills. And that all teaches you things and makes you an interesting person, no matter how well you do them. And that honestly changed my life. Because I went from a failure, someone who hadn't been talented enough at anything to excel, to someone who did things because I enjoyed them. I had been raised in such an achievement-oriented environment, so inundated with the myth of talent, that I thought it was only worth doing things if I could win at it. So that's our thought of the day.
Thank you, Sherry. One of the key functions of ASF is to help free thinkers make friends and connections. Please turn to the people on your left and your right now to introduce yourself to them. Thank you. You guys can finish that up, yeah. Okay, after the meeting we can get more. Our big meeting offers you the chance to have your voice heard. Talk to us if you would like to deliver the free thought of the day, misinformation moment, or member story. Those last two we don't have today, but we will in the future. If you have something to share and ASF is here to empower you, let us know. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Today our speaker is John Eichler, a fellow member of ASF. John got into computers almost by accident in 1959 to do processing of experimental results. For over 60 years, he's been interested in computers and has worked on a variety of machines at different levels. He has been somewhat of a do-it-yourselfer. In his presentation, he will talk of the dinosaurs of the computer field he's worked on. His presentation will be the non-technical nature. Remember that a great deal of his earlier work was done decades prior to the introduction of personal computers. He recently published a book titled Damn Computers, covering his experiences that are now available for purchase. Amazon. Yeah. And he has said in his career that he's probably sold more female underwear than most women buy in a lifetime. I'm wondering what he's meaning by that. So, I'm curious. I'd like to introduce John Eichler and his Damn Computers.
Get my phone on so I could talk. When Ann Orsi suggested or wanted me to talk, I told her that would be fine. I said, when would you like that? She said, well, how about in the August meeting? I said, okay, that's fine. But then we've had a series of cancellations of speakers the last couple times. So she said, would you like to do it in July? I said, well, that would be okay too, because I love to talk. I told her, no, well, what is the time limit? And I said, I normally talk about 2.5 hours. And she kind of said, well, maybe you could make it a little briefer than that. I said, okay. I'll do it. So anyway, I went for the benefit of my children, and more particularly our 6 grandchildren. It's awfully, this thing with computers, most people don't go back a long time. And with all the experiences I've had, I figured that would make it a subject for a nice book. So I've been working on this book, and just got it done. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and as I understand, 40,000 other sellers around the world. If you want to order a copy in Australia, it's actually printed in Australia. In the UK, it's printed in the UK. In fact, for the price of the thing, I had to put in euros, Canadian dollars, US dollars, euros, I mentioned that, Australian dollars, and everything else. So I put down my experiences. Now this really kind of got started back in the mid-50s. In the mid-50s, I was, and I don't, from the age group in here, you'll have a few people that remember Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color back in the 50s. Oh, yeah. Okay, and they would have these shows about spacecraft going up. And who was one of the people that they would have on talking about this, interviewing? Well, it was actually Wernher von Braun that was on TV. So I wrote a letter to Wernher von Braun, and he actually wrote one back to me, which I was trying to find. I have it somewhere at the house, but as my wife will attest, my house is not the most neat thing in the whole world, because most of my children and my wife and everything are kind of neatness freaks, not me. So I was going to start out with that. So anyway, I was interested in that, and I went into Chicago to the Illinois Institute of Technology, and I took a couple summer courses in there after high school, and I was really too lazy to move. Being a mathematician, one of the characteristics of most mathematicians are that they're very lazy. The whole philosophy is that if you're going to solve a problem, unlike an engineer who will solve the same problem over and over, the mathematician will solve the problem once and do it in the general case, which is probably what a lot of people in computers do. Okay, that's my book. Let me do a little housekeeping here. I brought along a couple of interesting items that I think that you'll like. So anyway, I went into the Illinois Institute of Technology Research Institute. Now, one of the people today who's listening in on this is my old boss, who's out in California, and he was in rockets. In fact, he was a Jewish fellow, and he heard the word LOX, not meaning the liquid oxygen, so he thought that would be interesting, so he got into rockets for the Air Force. And when I went to college, I started a rocket society. In fact, my first fall semester was the one where Russia sent up Sputnik. So I could ask these guys if they had any kind of a part-time job, and actually they did. They said, we have somebody in data reduction. I said, oh, that's interesting. They said, you work part-time, which I did for the summer, and then in the fall I went on full-time at Eichler, and this got into an 8-year-long period that I was there, and I finished up in high school in math and physics. Everybody says, math, oh, you're natural for computers. Actually, I don't know that much about math. I enjoy it. I like to sit back and watch it because it's so beautiful. But from the standpoint of being an applied mathematician, I really am not. So we had a device there called a strong shock tube. Now, a strong shock tube is a long device. Ours was 18 foot long. And the walls of this was 4 inches in outer diameter and 2 inches in inner diameter. And it was steel. So that's, when you're saying strong, you mean high pressures. This thing would take high pressures. And we would come down about 6 foot of the way and put a diaphragm in there, depending on the strength of the shock wave. We could take a piece of like cellulose acetate and put it in there. And you wouldn't need much of a pressure to break it. And then a shock wave goes down to the other end. So then if you go and put in an 1/8 of an inch thick piece of steel and go with a high pressure section, and we used to go and mix hydrogen, helium, and oxygen up there and set it off with about 20,000 volts of spark. And you get pressures going up to maybe 40,000, 50,000 psi. In one case, I remember, it's sheared 1/8-inch piece of steel and welded to the other end of the shock tube. You get shock waves of maybe 14 times, Mach 14 times the speed of sound going down there. The particular project that we had was for the Atomic Energy Commission. And it was a project on reactor containment. The same thing that happened in Chernobyl is what the Atomic Energy Commission over in this country was worried about. So we got into this thing with, we would emulate explosion in a nuclear reactor and try and design a blast shield for it. So what we would do is wrong button. So what we would do is we take samples of wood and put it in there to see if the wood is going to collapse and absorb the shock, so we can layer it like that. Well, we end up by putting pressure. I got the wrong one again. We put pressure gauges, and we end up with a pressure pulse like this, which was down by 0 volts or 0 psi. Then when the shock wave passed, it would go up here, but then the shock wave would actually hit the other end and reflect back at a higher rate. So then it would go up to a higher value of psi and then gradually taper off. Well, my job was to go and sit down with a magnifying glass and measure how high it went and what the durations were, because we could get information. Well, this is a tedious job because we were running experiments all the time. So I heard about this thing called a computer. And I thought, well, we might as well try it. Now this, by the way, is what our actual lab looked like. This was a blast shield. It had 3/4-inch plywood, like 4 by 6 foot pieces of plywood. And in between it had like 6 inches of sand. And the glass that we could look through here was bulletproof, about this thick. Because sometimes you never know. We would blow out windows here in the lab and everything else. And we would take our output from our pressure gauges and put them into oscilloscopes. So we had Polaroid cameras on the top. And we would open up the Polaroid camera, set off the experiment, then pull it out, and we could get the trace that we could take a look at. Okay, so the first computer that Armor Research had was an IBM 650. 650. 650 came out in 1953. Very interesting machine. It was basically an adding machine. And it had a magnetic drum. Now the magnetic drum, as it moves around, I'm going to take a second and set my phone down here because I don't want to talk over the 2 hours. So on this drum, they could record 10-digit numbers, and they had 2,000 of them. And that was the main memory of the computer. Now what you would have to do, a good programmer in those days, would have a sheet of paper with columns showing all the different columns that the drum would have. So you would know the rotation speed of the drum. You know how long the instruction would take. So as the drum came around, it would read it off, and one of the addresses to get this data from, you calculate out how many boxes down that data should be put, such that the drum, this is, if you want a really fast operating thing, you know ahead of time where it is. And in fact, the instructions on this thing, they had 2 digits for an opcode, and they had 4 digits which represented where the data was coming from, and another 4 digits where the next instruction on the drum was from. So there was no high-speed memory at all. They had a couple of accumulators, and they would just add to the accumulator, put in the lower accumulator, store that on another location on the drum. So it was a very primitive machine. No operating system, no nothing. It was just bare bones. So I got a manual. I started reading on the 650. Just about the time I got to really understand the machine, they took it away. Oh. It was 1960, the Census Department decided to use 3 machines, 2 in North Carolina and 1 at IIT Research, to analyze the census, which is a good way to get a new machine. And the government would pay for a lot of this stuff. And the census people would use it at night. But during the daytime, it was available for our use. Now, to give you a little bit of an idea, I mean, you go to the gym and you pump iron and stuff. Well, this thing really pumped iron. This is how big it was. And you see a little picture down in the corner. There's several rows of chassis and big cabinets. This thing was huge. In fact, it was so huge that I believe the figure was you have to, specification, you had to have 3,250 square foot. And I don't know whether it was a 10 or 15 ton air conditioner to do this. In fact, one time it hit all the newspapers in Chicago because the water in Chicago was not the cleanest. And one of the air conditioners, or the air conditioner on the thing, the filter got jammed with fish particles. And it took this down, and this was a big thing back in the day, okay? So anyway, this was the computer, and this was the main terminal that you would operate with the console. Here was the console. I have a better picture of that with a bunch of switches. They had a tape control unit, and actually we had 2 banks of tape drives, so we could, one of the TCU's tape control units would operate one side, and the other tape control unit would operate the other side, which I took advantage of. I bet a guy $5 that my way would work, and I never collected from him, but he was kind of a stuffed mathematician. But anyway, we had a paper tape reader. The whole input to this machine was a 10 character per second paper tape reader. And there was a drawer. So what you would do is pull out the drawer, put in the paper tape, you go and read it through and put it on your program or whatever you had on mag tape. Then the mag tape would be read in by the computer, compiled, the program would be compiled, and then the output would go to another mag tape. And then we had and this was the first time I'd ever seen one, a Freedom Flexo writer, which was a typewriter. And so you couldn't really communicate with the computer like that, but it was nice to log results. Now, something that was very unique, I've never seen it since this computer had, it had a cathode ray display, a little television that was divided up as a matrix, 64 by 64, giving you a total of 4,096 possible dots. We had 8K, twice that amount. So if you're accessing the first bank of memory, that would show up as a little dot every time you access that memory location. And if you had wanted to access the second bank, it would show it up over that. Now this was handy because back in those days, when your program was executing, you never knew when you went into an infinite loop. They charged us $650 an hour to use this thing. Consequently, you were very cognizant and wanted to be aware of the fact when the computer was doing nothing. So you would get down and you look at the screen, and you could tell because the same pattern, if it was occurring over and over again, you knew you were in an infinite loop. So you stopped the machine to go on, which was kind of an interesting little device. Now, this is a picture of the actual machine, and with this big arrow pointing at my head, that's me. And this guy's name was Ed. I don't remember his last name. This was one of the engineers, and then somebody over here. This was in a book or a pamphlet I got on the internet from Battelle Institute in Cleveland. And this is what the console looked like. Now, we'd always have when one of the people would leave from the institute, when we have a going away party, we'd always find some Italian restaurant or something like that around the place to go to. And so we go over there for a couple of hours. One time I had rented time on this thing from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Well, I was over there and people kept buying martinis for me. And so I got back there, and you can imagine what it was like trying to read all the lights in that console. I mean, I could see double and triple lights going back and forth. In fact, I got to know this machine so well that when I would come on, all the operators would take off for a cigarette break, and I would just have the whole machine to myself. So I could play around, I could stop programs, I could experiment with different, and I could even make a little diagram, the CRT was back here. I could even have little pictures I would draw on the CRT, which I always had a lot of. To me, computers are just a way of having fun. It's like being an artist. Artist has the palette of paints. The computer programmer has the palette of instructions on the machine. And these machines, this one had a compiler. Now a compiler would go and take like A plus B equals C. So a compiler, you could write it out like that, like an engineer would write it. And then the compiler would convert that into machine language. And machine language is the actual machine language instructions that the computer would use. So it was kind of, but the compiler was really buggy from UNIVAC. So I did most of my work in assembly language. But all kinds of things. You could stop this thing. You could execute one instruction at a time if you had with your program. It was really kind of a neat device. Here's one of the magnetic tape units. Now, they had a kind of a unique thing. You can see it on this diagram. You see around the center, those little places where the tape is raised up. Well, what they did is they had, for the leader on the tape, they had little rubber, and this little rubber thing had little prongs coming up like this, and they would go up like this and down like this and down like this, you know, and they put that on the tape such that rather than being a complete circular, it would make more of a square. But I found another use for these, a very practical use. What I would do is I would get a leader when they were throwing them away. I'd get into the garbage can, pull it out. I'd take that rubber thing and I'd pull that away from the metal leader tape. So it had this long strip about this long with all these little things. It's great for opening jars. You put that thing on a jar and you could just open it like gangbusters. I thought it was a really cool application for that. Okay, the big computer, which was over a $2 million machine, had no printers attached to it. Outside that little flexor writer, which was so slow, you know, that was 10 characters per second or less that it was putting out. So what we would do is we put our output on a tape drive. And then we take the tape into our sophisticated high-speed printer. Now this thing had 2 bays of electronics. This high, this wide, you know, 6 foot long. And they're all vacuum tubes, of course. So in the summertime, we'd open up the ends and we'd put 2 big house fans at either end to blow through to keep it cool. All of the UNIVAC equipment, including the printer, was down about, well, 40 to 60% of the time. And so we had engineers around there all the time trying to figure out what the thing was. And this high-speed printer was really unique. I remember the console here, and the guy would go in and he wouldn't read the tape, and he'd do the thing, try to back the tape up and go to the next block and back it up, and it was just a pain to get the output out. The printer itself was kind of interesting because it had a drum. The drum, as you can see, had all the characters on it. So rather than more modern high-speed printers had a belt that went around with the characters on, this thing, the drum rotated around, and when the proper character was at the proper position, clunk, 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 and out would come the information, which was kind of unique. Now, these early computers did not have a lot of high-speed memory. What they had for a high speed, they had these ferrite cores. So these ferrite cores are little donuts. And what it was, you put wires through them, and if you put in the proper wires, you could flip the polarity, North Pole to South Pole, you could flip it, and that's how you would retain memory. Which, one nice feature about this, like flash memory, once you turned on a bit, that bit would stay on, even if the power went out. And then when the power came up again, you could continue right on. But of course, with the computer, there's so many other things with the UNIVAC. If the power went down, you'd have to go in and boot the whole thing up. Which reminded me, because today you hear a lot about hackers on computers. Well, I will proudly pat myself on the back for being one of the first hackers on computers in the world. Our UNIVAC on the drum it had, and I think I've got a picture of the drum. Whoops, oh, these are the memory stacks. We had 2 stacks. Each one of them had 4,096 36-bit words. This was before the byte. Okay, the byte only came into existence with IBM 360, which came out about 1965. So we had these two banks. Each one of them had a cabinet this big by this big by this big that it resided in, and then all kinds of electronics to do it. But it was very fast. You know, you could transmit a location, contents of a location from here over to here, and it would take you 18 microseconds. It's 18 millionths of a second. Now, compared to the IBM 650, which you have to read off the drum going around, this was a tremendous increase in speed. Today, of course, computers can do it in a fraction of a billionth of a second. So it's, you know, makes this thing 10,000 times faster than these could do it. This was the drum. Now, they had this drum, and it was it had 32,000 36-bit words. And it would rotate around, and that was considered a lot. And they had what it was, they logically divided it up into what was called the A drum and the B drum. Now the A drum is what programmers could use. You had 16,000 words that you could use. The B drum is what the systems people would use. Now the UNIVAC, even though its size, did not have an operating system. Rather, in the high-speed memory, they reserved 192 spots, and what they would do is read up a little subroutine in there. So if I wanted to multiply two numbers together, or that's not a good, if I wanted to print out or format a number, I would call a routine, and that routine, the system would go, load that into the high-speed memory, perform the routine, and so that memory was always being overwritten with new routines. Well, that was kind of neat, but the thing is that I'm always curious. So I was really curious to what's on drum B. I mean, I knew drum A. I used drum A all the time. But what's on drum B? Well, it turns out on the console, they had a little switch that you could switch between drum A and drum B. Most of the time, the operators, you know, the people from God, they sat there and operated the machine. They would control all of that. Well, I realized that you could do a dump with the drum and you get all the information out. So I very sneakily went up one time, and I was kind of leaning over the console like this, and I said, oh, you know, can you give me a dump of my drum so I can see what's going on? And I hit the B button. Well, out comes this, you know, old computer paper about this big, the whole contents of drum B. And I thought, boy, this is nice. Now, all was encoded in the machine language, you know, and it was all numbers. You know, you have to know 45 was a return jump, 63 was external function. You knew all that. So you have to go through each location and go backwards and figure out what the thing is doing. So I thought this was fascinating. And when I talk about hackers, this is fascinating. So what I used to do is I found the instruction that I can switch on my program from drum A to drum B and vice versa. So I would go in there, and if I didn't like a particular format, I would change the drum. Now the drum had a checksum, so it knew what the checksum for that, or what that particular little routine did, and if it had any changes in it. So I, of course, learned how to do the checksums. So I would change the checksum in there, so they couldn't tell anything was going wrong with the machine, until other programmers got on there after me. And all of a sudden, they began to come out with these crazy results. What the hell is going on? So the standing rule was, if Eichler's on the machine, reboot the whole thing, which was standard operating procedure back then. The whole machine was comprised of vacuum tubes. This is a gate. That's like a thing where you have one signal coming in and another signal, A and B. You say if A and B are equal to each other, C goes out. In other words, this is a fundamental building block of a computer. So I remember at nights going around when we had a problem, and we would unscrew these things and pull them out and put a new one in. That was how we would fix the machine. We wouldn't go down, then we leave it up to the engineers. Then oops, there I go again. We'd leave it up to the engineers to actually fix what was going on. These things generated heat like mad. Yeah, of course, they all raised floors and the big air conditioners and what have you. Now, there was one application which I'm particularly proud of. This was way back before they had graphic displays like they have today. really in the old days, before they had mice, before they had any kind of consoles. So what some of the people in the computer department went and did, they took an oscilloscope. Now the oscilloscope will show a trace on the face of it, and you control with two inputs. One input will be time, and the other one will be how high it is, the amplitude. So in the program, this computer had no transistors. So the engineers, of course, the transistor was just the newest, greatest thing in the block. So what they did is they made a device. It was all hand-wired at the time and everything, which was a digital to analog converter, which take a digital number from the computer, make it into an analog, which is a voltage variation. And then they had the corresponding thing would take an analog signal and make it into a digital. So what they did is they hooked this up so that the computer could go and draw the trace. And then they made a little keyboard like this, and what you would do is punch a button, which would interrupt, tap the computer on the shoulder and say, hey, we want to do something at this time, take it off and do something with the program. And then for a mouse, we had this device you can see here, and it was a metal device, had potentiometers underneath. And it had a little rod, you can see in my hand, and then it would have strings over to all four corners. And they have little pulleys on the four corners. So what you do is when you would move this, it would change the resistance, and consequently they fed that into the analog to digital part, and you could get back in the computer what it was doing, which was really kind of neat because it was a device that you could do. So I made it, on my program, I would go and I would allow you to move a vertical line, and you put it between 2 points, and then tap one of those buttons, and I would go in and do an average of it and draw an average line. So it was really neat. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first application of a computer, and I could be wrong, but it's the first application of a computer that I know of that allowed an engineer to sit down at a terminal and actually do data reduction. And that was one thing which I was extremely proud of when I did that. Later on, they got in a IBM 7094, which was a transistorized machine, a much bigger machine, much faster machine. But there the operators had to do anything. I couldn't get my hands on that thing. But they did have two 1400, I think the 1401s, which were smaller computers. I should make a footnote to this now. Back before the IBM 360 came out, there were two general classes of computers. Now, I'm not talking about analog machines. The analog machines were of a different color. But there were two classes of computers. One were the character-oriented ones, like the 1401. This was designed for a business application where you have to keep a bunch of numbers to add up and this type of thing. Then the scientific ones all had, like the 7094 even, had a 36-bit word. You needed a lot of bits to represent big numbers. So those two branches of computers, the 7094, of course, was a word-oriented machine. They had, I think at that time, it was 32,000 words in this, but they were all transistorized, so it was a pretty big thing. Anyway, my job, or what I ended up doing, was writing a program for the Atomic Energy Commission that you could take 40 layers of materials, knowing the compressibility of each one, even when we put water in there or steel or whatever have you, and hit it with an arbitrary wave and duplicate what we were doing with the shock tube. In other words, the material would crush in and then it would move away from the wall and everything. And I wrote a big fat report about that, that the Atomic Energy, I think the report is still available from the Atomic Energy Commission or from the government today. Okay, then after working for 8 years, and what I would do is I would sit in my little cubicle, puffing on my pipe or smoking a cigar or something while I was, and it was nobody would come to see me anymore because I was the only person in the group that knew anything about computers. And it was a big mystery. Wasn't it, Paul? My boss is out in California, Palo Alto, and I think he's listening into this today. But the bosses always know better than the employees do. But anyway, I was in this little cubicle, and I decided, well, maybe I should get out of here and get a little more experience. Our family had a department store that was started in 1891. And my father and his father before him were in the store. And I always wanted to get back and be a merchant like my dad. But I would go in Chicago and I would go down to Marshall Fields or Carson Perry's or other places, and I wanted to get training in, being a manager, this type of thing. And everybody would look at, well, how much are you making now? I'm making X. Oh, that's twice as we pay any trainee. So I couldn't get it. So I decided to go out and try and get another job. I had 2 jobs. One was with Boise Cascade Corporation. The other one was with United Airlines. United Airlines at the time had got a UNIVAC 1108, which was the big brother of the 1105 in a transistorized version, and they wanted me to go in every half a second and update their database. The other one was with Boise Cascade. Now, Boise Cascade owned the Hoarder, which at that time, I don't even know whether it exists today, office supply division in Chicago. So I thought, this is a dirty, hands-on type thing where I could learn something about business. So I chose to go with Boise Cascade. Well, Boise Cascade had ordered a IBM 360 Model 30. This was, the Model 20 was the smallest, but the Model 30 was the next one up. And of course, by that time, I was pretty familiar with how computers work. So I get down there, I'm doing a job interview, and they're taking me around, introducing me to people, and they took me into this one office, and they said, this is Devon Bennett. I said, hi, my name is John Eichler, and he had this big dump, because to debug programs back then, you always had to print out all the memory locations and everything, so he would go in there he was trying to find an error. But this guy was a COBOL programmer, and didn't have any idea at all about how machine language worked. And the UNIVAC used octal. In other words, it took the 36 bits and divided it up in groups of 3. So you'd have those the 3 bits could represent 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. No 8s or 9s. And then 10, 11, 12, like this. Hex, which IBM used, broke them up into groups of 4, called hexadecimal. So there you could go from 0 to 15 for each of the combinations. But this was a hex dump, the first one I'd ever seen. I knew the principle, first one I'd ever seen. So I said, well, what's your problem? He said, it's telling me here that I have this one line is an error. He said, but I don't know where it is. And so I took, the whole address portion, it was all written out in hex. I put that into bits, divided that up in groups of 3, converted it to octal. Then I did the arithmetic in octal, which I was familiar with. Took my result, put it back with all the bits, divided it up in groups of 4, and I looked at this program. I said, your error's on this line. I said, but I don't know COBOL, so I don't know what's wrong with this line, but this is the line that your error's on. They were so impressed they hired me right off the bat, which was, I thought, kind of fun. I have a tremendous amount of fun with this machine. For the first 2 months after it came in, well, the first time it was supposed to come in by Memorial Day, and the guy from IBM said, yes, it would come in. So they had all the room prepared and everything. It came in, and there was this little guy by the name of Bernie. By little, I mean, he was short. And Bernie went, it was from IBM, and his job was to generate the operating system for this. A very unique operating system they had. But he had a deck of cards he came in with. And so he put the deck of cards into the card reader and let her rip. Boise was kind of cheap. Rather than getting a separate card reader and a card punch, they got one that both read and punched. So then it took the results of his operation and punched them all out in the cards that he had so carefully prepared to do the operating system. So that poor guy, he was going to Montreal to Expo 67, I think it was, in Montreal, and he was leaving at 4 o'clock in the morning. And he was tired, and I kept him until after midnight. I said, you said this machine's going to be ready for Memorial Day. So I kept him until after midnight there, and I'll make it, the guy probably will never forget me. But anyway, I got the whole machine over the Memorial Day weekend to myself. And I went in and there were two types of key punches, IBM 26 and IBM 29. There's certain characters on the 29 that were not on the 26. So in order to program the machine, I needed a 29, but I didn't have a 29, I had a 26. So the first program I wrote for this machine was I would sit down at the console, because this machine actually had a console, you could communicate with the machine. I sat down at the console and wrote a little program that would allow me to sit at the console and type in a card, hit the carriage return, it would print that card line out on the high-speed printer and punch a card for me. So I made this $750,000 machine into a card punch for my first program. This was the first time I was introduced to disk memory. This is IBM 1311. The 1311 stored a whopping 2.5 megabytes, about the size of one of your camera pictures today. I mean, but this was a big leap forward. I mean, all of a sudden, and we had two of these things, 2 or 3 of them, I forgot which one. But it was so neat, and you could take out the disk drive here and put a new disk drive in, so it was kind of an open-ended machine. This was the console. Once again, I used to have a lot of fun, because what I would do, they had one of the buttons down here that says pause. Now, all pause does, computers operate on a clock, and so everything's timed. So pause just stops the clock. And at this time, IBM was just introducing some intelligence into some of the peripherals, like the printer. They put out a couple of lines and would print it out, like a microprocessor today, but a lot of the circuitry back then. And the same thing with the tape drive and the card readers and all this stuff. So what I would do is I would go in there, because all these guys were brand new operators, and I would lean up against there and hit the pause button. Then I'd walk away. Stuff would still continue to operate. All of a sudden, the whole computer would come to a dead halt. Nobody knew what to do. They would panic at this. And so then I would go over there, it's just a pause. I hit the pause again, the whole computer would come up again. There was one time that one of the buttons, and I think it was this red one over here, one of these two, was IPL, which means initial program load. So for the first couple of months, I was the only person who could really operate the damn thing. So they called me at one time at 10 o'clock in the morning. John, the computer's not working. What? Come on in here. So I'd run in there. And the operator was sitting there, and he was hitting the IPL button to load the program, his initial program load, hitting the button. And it didn't work. And then another guy sat down, and he started hitting again. I said, that's ridiculous. And I hit it, and it comes right up. So, of course, I want to find out why it's not coming up. So I hit it again, and it comes right up again. And then the operators all took turns, and they all hit the button, and nothing would happen. So I would say had this kind of a magic touch with computers. And some of the times I think it was hilarious because of the stuff. In fact, there were 2 operating systems for this. There was DOS. DOS was the disk operating system, and as opposed to Big OS, which is for the bigger machines. And so we were using DOS, and it was supposed to generate a thing. And they had a guy in from Boise, Idaho, who worked with the big operating systems, and he was training the other guys how to operate this machine. And one time it wouldn't work, and I told him, I said, look, do you tell DOS you love her? He said, what? And so that night when everybody went, I went in and typed a big long love letter on the console to DOS saying how better she is than the OS. I figured they would like to do it. So anyway, after 2 years, my father passed away. So I thought, this is my opportunity to go back into our business. And we had this store, which was started back in 1891 in Dixon, Illinois. And it was 3 floors, about 12,000 square foot. Because of an agreement we had back in when an older building of ours was built, we only could sell women's stuff. So we had this store. This is like half of the first floor, and then we had a second floor and a basement. So anyway, we had an institution north of town, and they would have, it was for mentally retarded, and they come in and they buy like $350 for one person at a time. And so I was selling, with underwear. In fact, I made a chart for the size chart for women, and this person that we interacted with the state would go and they send it down to the state to standardize their size charting. So I've sold more women's apparel than probably anybody else that most women buy in many lifetimes. Then I went and this was the early 70s. I closed the store in 1975 because we were having a recession and everything. It was a hard thing, and my brother and I were in it. So I went and found a job at Telemed Corporation in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. Telemed analyzed 1.5 million electrocardiograms a year from hospitals and doctors' offices all around the world, or all around the United States. So what we would do is they would hook you up with the leads on the chest, and then make a strip chart coming out like this, and then doctors can overread this. So they had this program to analyze this. Well, they had big machines. I mean, they had a room that's at least as big as this, and they had all kinds of dual systems and all this type of thing. But they wanted to make a mini computer system. So when an EKG comes in, you have an interface with a telephone, then you have to take the signal coming in and convert it into something the computer would understand. And we had a 10 megabyte disk at this time. We went from a 2.5 up to a 10. And then we had all kinds of plotters and everything else. So they had these systems. The company bought one out in New Jersey. I went out for 4 months to learn how to operate it. It was a 16-bit computer. It was an interdata computer. And the reason why interdata is very close to an IBM 360's instruction format, so it was easy to convert the program over. This is what the system looked like. We basically had the 10 megabyte drive here. We had a computer console here. Now this is something you don't see much anymore. I don't think you see, it looks like this. Okay? And you punch it in here, the lights would come up and everything else. So that was the console in this machine. And let's see, is there anything else? Oh, we had the computer part was down here. We had a direct writer, we had a console, disk drives. These were the smaller disk drives. I've got 150 megabyte disk drives for this. But anyway, this was the system that I went out to design. When I got back to Telemed, I wanted to go with a 32-bit computer processor. And so I was in charge of designing this, and I had 10 people working for me to put it together. This is a 10 megabyte disk drive. And the top part of it was divided up in two platters, 5 on the top and 5 on the bottom. So if you wanted to, you could get your disk drive out like this, and just, if I can open it, the magnetic platter was in there. So you could go and put this in, and then take that out and copy it and everything else. So this was kind of neat. And most of the disk drives from then on that I was working with were removables. Okay, then we got the 300 megabyte. Now this is actually a disk back for that other machine, but this was a 300 megabyte disk drive. It was this wide, this long, this high, weighed 550 pounds, so it was like pumping iron. And it had a disk pack that had, I believe it was 16 surfaces, top and bottom surfaces. You don't smoke around these things. If you smoke around them, the head flies closer to the disk in micro inches than the smoke particle is. So you're crashing. And I've seen these crash, and when it crashes, it kind of goes across all of the different heads and everything else, and it's a very expensive proposition to get them fixed. Also, you don't set your disk pack back at the back of the drive. One time when I went into work, I heard this one gal who worked for me go, ah, like this. I thought, what the hell happened? I went back and asked her, so, when we tried to back these up all the time, but it turned out that it erased part of the deal since the last backup. And she was not a happy camper. So this was the system that we produced, and this was a 10 megabyte. These each were 350 megabytes apiece. And then the computer was up here, and this was our EPIC system. Electrocardiogram processing, interpretation, I forgot what the whole thing was. But this is a system that I produced. I did all of the systems type work, with operating system, timing and everything. I had other people do miscellaneous peripheral type programs. The whole system came together in 15 minutes. Once, with everybody working on separate programs, because I had set up the interfaces and I just let the person go and do their thing, because they have to conform to this input and this output. So then we had a doctor down here, a cardiologist, that we sold one of the earlier 16-bit systems to. So I came down, when they sold him, the salesman sold him twice the number of receivers and twice the number of, he oversold the system. And the doctor goes and says, look, I paid 175 grand for this. It doesn't work. So I was supposed to come down to Little Rock for 2 days. Ended up spending 11 days down here. They interfaced with all kinds of different printers and stuff that I had to all figure out. And by the time I left, the doctor thought I could walk on water. So when he was considering buying a 32-bit machine, he went and would only deal with me. And then I went and for one reason or another, I left the company because they were going to get into a maintenance mode. I went to work as a consultant for 6 months. And then he finally found me. He said, John, can you come down here? And so I came down to Little Rock, ECG Systems. And this is, I just threw this in here to tell you the time. The Interdata and UNIVAC was way down here. Each of these, this is 1,000 bytes, 10, 100, 1,000,000 bytes, 1 billion bytes, 1 trillion bytes. And so with the, so we, in the early days, we were way down in this, like 1 million bytes is really big. Today, the computers are up here in the terabyte range, where you're talking about 1 trillion bytes of information, going from the old core stacks to memory boards. This memory board had 64,000 bytes of memory on it, cost about 6 grand. And it so happens that I have one right here. This is how big our computer was. And we have 16 boards in the computer. And then underneath here, they have a plane where all of these, those are the little cores. So it was really kind of neat. But as I say, the system was, and when other, sometimes at EKG systems, or ECG systems, I would do work for some of the other people that had telemed systems, because I knew Interdata. And so when they went over to, everybody started going over to microprocessors, I got a ton of equipment. You know, actually I got about 2 tons of equipment. People would say, hey, do you want my system? You know, I got those 300 megabyte drives, I had 2 of those. I had about 5 or 6 computers, 32-bit computers and stuff. And then the latest, of course, is this. This is the 4 terabyte memory today. You can see where I was coming from, where you're coming from. This was I did some electronic design. I designed the whole front end to our system down here in Little Rock. In fact, I even wrote the operating system here. IBM and Hewlett-Packard would take 60 seconds to analyze an EKG. No, they would take, I don't know how long it would take them, but by the time you sent it in, it would be like 2 to 3 minutes that the output was coming out. I wrote my own operating system. By the time this thing was done analyzing after 22 seconds, I was already sending back. I go to these conferences. I get IBM and HP guys who come up to me, and they couldn't figure out how I did it. My secret in doing it is I wrote the operating system, and the operating system used core memory. So if my system would go down, you turn it back on, 5 seconds it was processing ECGs again. Today, this is Paul Allen Seattle Computer Museum. They have one of these 32-bit consoles, which is kind of nice. I gave them about a half a dozen of those things. I kept one for myself. I had to keep something from there. And this is my computer at Paul Allen's museum. This is the one that I had in my son's bedroom. They have all kinds of stuff. You can see that with the lights on here and the lights on here, they actually got the thing up and running. Because once you have a computer, it just keeps on ticking like mad. And then, for the fun of it, a friend of mine had a fast tax business. So he said, hey, John, can we do something? I have like 12 employees. I don't want to get 12 computers for them. So I said, sure. So what I did is I designed a handheld calculator. Now, this is what the handheld calculator looked like when I was doing my testing on it. I mean, the board, I did the board. I have a couple batteries in here. In fact, this one, I don't know whether this one, but the other one I have. But I have the display up here. So I did the whole thing with a single chip. And the single chip I would program. There's no operating system or anything. In fact, I was 1 byte shy of what I needed to do a decimal point in a particular calculation. But since the calculation was, done by so very few people, I did not put that in. But this is what the whole thing looked like, and I made a custom back like this I would glue on, and then that would be the calculator. And what year? 94, 95. I forgot. I can tell you in a second when I turn around. No, it doesn't. But it has everything. I got the whole 1040 into, I think it was 6,400 bytes. There's no operating system or anything here. I was really tight. I had 100 pages of coding that went into that single chip on the computer. It's on the other side here. But that worked very nicely. He used them that year. But that's the completed text calculator. Any questions?
I guess I'll start out.
Sure. The drum system that you had that had the A and B divisions.
Right.
Do they have the same instruction set on both?
Yeah, well, basically you read or wrote from a particular location with an address. So it just turned out that you take 16K, which is 2 to the 14th, I think, the power of 14 bits, and then just add one more bit on, and that would tell you whether you're reading from drum A or drum B.
But they were used for different things.
Oh, yeah, it's like opening up. Oh, here's 16,000 locations you can use, but you stay away from that 16,000. So they use them, but that was all pre-operating system.
You mentioned that at some point people had to stop smoking around these machines, and I kind of wonder, how did that cultural shift occur? Because it was like everybody smoked in the office back then, and then all of a sudden you start having machine problems, and you have to change.
Most of the time, we would have the machines in a environment. Like here in town, we had a room that was no smoking in the room, but you could, it was all glass and stuff like that. You could do it. One time, Telemed, after I stopped working at Telemed, I was working for this consulting agency, and they called me up, and I think it was on a Tuesday, and they said, Ken, we were having a problem because they had a branch in Omaha, Nebraska called Health Tech, and that's where they were manufacturing the machines. I just developed them. That's the nice thing, you're lazy, you develop it once and then let other people do it the rest of the time. So anyway, they called me and said, John, we're having problems out there. The machines aren't working. And I said, oh, really? And said, can you hop on a plane, buy a couple of days of your time, can you hop on a plane and go out to Omaha? And said, that was a Tuesday, and I said, sure, I'll hop on a plane this morning and go out to Omaha. But I've got to be back on Thursday night because my son, who was big in swimming, was having a big swim meet there, and I told him I had to be back. So I flew out there on Tuesday, met a guy who was a good friend of mine out there, and he took me in, and I sat down at the computer, and the computer was as slow as molasses. I couldn't figure out what was going on. So I started working on the thing, and I was pretty good at debugging machines because at that time I didn't know as much about hardware, but hardware, software, same thing. So I saw this, and they said, well, tomorrow morning we're having a person from Oceanport, I think it was Oceanport, New Jersey, where the machine was made, flying in, and we're having somebody from Kansas City that works for this company fly in. And so I said, okay, so the next morning these guys get on, and there it was in more of a production environment. It wasn't nice. And one of the guys from, I think a guy from Kansas City, was smoking up a storm in there, and he crashed one of the drives. I thought, by the time you get done with the platters and the heads and everything else. It was a multi-$1,000 type deal. I used to have a lot of fun. One time I had my own development machine down here in Little Rock. One Monday morning I came in and the thing was dead. I couldn't figure it out. So these boards, I mean, this board was like $6,500. So these computer boards are kind of expensive. And they had machines similar to what I had out at the Air Force Base. So they had somebody taking care of interdata around this area. And the guy comes in and he has this satchel of boards because they, don't figure out what's going on. Just pull a board out and put another one in and see if it works and that kind of stuff. So I was getting into hardware at that time because I had designed a lot of hardware. So he said, it's got to be this C board or whatever it was. He said, we don't have one of those. We're going to have to order one from Tulsa. We'll have it flown in. I'm going to put out a special flight to fly it in, and I'll be back in late afternoon. I thought, well, what the devil, I have nothing to do. So I opened, they had the books with all the circuitry, and I got pretty good at reading. So I started looking through the circuitry and stuff and putting in the different things to test out, because you want to test and see where the problem is, the same way as a doctor would do a diagnostic. So I tested it, and I came out, and there was one chip in there that I figured was bad. And the chip was a LS170, just a little teeny chip. But I knew what the chip was. But then I had, from my design stuff, an LS670, which was just a different type of output, but it would have worked just as well. So I pull the board out, I take my soldering iron, pull the chip off, put my other chip in, solder it in, put it in. The guy walks in with his new board, and all of a sudden the computer's running like mad. I used to have a lot of fun just goofing around with computers.
Any other questions?
How many times did you run into people who said, this is it, we've perfected the computer, we've hit a plateau, they're never going to get better than this?
Nothing, because my specialty was if you wanted a computer to do something and all the experts said it couldn't be done, then they would, I'd show them how to do it. With the UNIVAC one time, that curve I showed you that we get out from the shock tube, okay, what we had to do was to digitize that with to the millionths of a second, microseconds. And what we had a big Ampex tape recorder, a big wide thing, and we would record the signals at 60 inches per second. We play it back at 1 7/8 inches per second to slow it down. Now that UNIVAC had no interval timer. Interval timers today is where you can set up with an instruction. You say, hey, wake me up in 10 microseconds, or wake me up in 3 milliseconds, or whatever you want to do. But that computer didn't have one. So I wrote, when it came down to read this thing in through the analog to digital converters, there was one guy there in the computer department, and he had a big pipe, and he always walked around, he was the kind of the guru there. And so he figured it out and said, there's no way that you can do this on the computer. And I said, I can do anything. Oh, there's no way you can do this. I was just a young punk, just got out of college and stuff. So anyway, what I did is I took the tape control unit, and you have one bank which controls one side, and one bank that controls the other side. So in reading it in, I wrote a single program that had I would imagine probably 18 or 20 different data paths. All of them, because I added up all the instructions, would take exactly 800 microseconds. So it would come down, and the data would come in, it would fill up the buffer to go out to that tape drive, and then it would switch over, fill up the other buffer while that tape drive was going down. And I had a variable oscillator that I could feed in, and I could turn the oscillator, and I could get the thing going faster and faster and faster until it crapped out. So I knew I could do the thing, so I actually did that, and I wrote a program to read the two tapes in and put all the information on the drum, combine everything together. And I bet the guy $5. He never paid up. Okay, so go ahead.
Thank you, John. That was fascinating. We hope you found today's meeting thought-provoking, and we hope you've cultivated new friendships. If you're glad people in Central Arkansas are organizing a secular community and working to improve the lives of freethinkers, please consider joining ASF by signing up at the back table or making a donation. The donation bowl, well, it's there. Another way that you can meet new friends and get involved in your community is by attending other events or joining our group volunteers and event hosts. Now, what we've got upcoming is this Monday, tomorrow, we've got a Zoom pint night, and it is a celebration of Brian's birthday. Yay! Thursday, there is a Beyond Belief, Substance Abuse and Recovery. And then again, you can just check the website Meetup with all of our calendar of events. If you'd like to host an event, such as a potluck, book club, or families meetup, all you have to do is to let us know, and we'll get the word out. Becoming a secular organizer is that easy. Also, if you'd like to be considered as a speaker of one of our future meetings, or if you know someone who might be interesting, please talk to us after the meeting. We also have need for people who would help us by contributing their skills in graphic design, website development, law, or a number of other fields. If you have skills to contribute to our cause, please see the volunteer table at the back of the room. The volunteer table is there when we help people with similar interests and we work in teams. I want to thank you guys for coming, and we'll see y'all next month. Ciao.
The Arkansas Society of Freethinkers. Check us out online at arfreethinkers.org. You can also find us on Meetup, Facebook, and on YouTube. At Arkansas Society of Freethinkers, people are accepted as human beings and are never threatened with eternal damnation. In a nutshell, a freethinker believes there are no
cell phone, you can scan the QR code for an organization called CARES, C-A-R-E-S. They are working diligently to eliminate the LEARNS Act. Okay, so all that information is in the back. We need to get this taken care of. We need to eliminate the LEARNS Act. Thank you.
So kids can learn.
They're not learning that.
Freethinkers. Check us out online at arfreethinkers.org. You can also find us on Meetup, Facebook, and on YouTube. At Arkansas Society of Freethinkers, people are accepted as human beings and are never threatened with eternal damnation. In a nutshell, a freethinker believes there are no imaginary gods whose dogma is sent to control the human race. Rather, we are all human beings responsible for our own actions and our own future. Check us out at any of the following online locations. Send us an email and let's talk. Or go to Meetup and join us at any of our regularly scheduled events. Let's get together and hope to see you soon. If you'd like to